Hello, everyone, and welcome to Placing Faces, the show where we sit down with some of the most influential casting directors in all of Hollywood and across the entertainment spectrum. I'm your host, Charlie Chappell, and today we're talking with Marsha Goodman, who's a casting director, a voice director, and probably a huge influence on your childhood. Marsha is responsible for a good many of the cartoons we all know and love. She got her start with Deke at the very beginning. She's cast and voice directed everything from Inspector Gadget, The Real Ghostbusters, G.I. Joe, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, to Buddy Thunderstruck, not to mention both the old school and recent reboot of the Care Bears. We got to sit down with Marsha in her Los Angeles home on a beautiful Wednesday. She was incredibly welcoming and just a joy to meet. She offered to feed us, made sure we were never thirsty, and kept us so engaged with their stories that it was really easy to lose track of time. Marsha is a casting great in the VO world, giving legends like Maurice, LaMarche, Billy West, and countless others their first roles in animation. She has an Emmy under her belt for Madeline and shows no signs of stopping. She's also got a keenly developed sense of humor, which has clearly served her well in her work and relationships with the folks she's cast. It was wonderful to chat with Marsha, and we had a great time delving into the nitty-gritty of animation casting. So, sit back, prepare to take a trip down nostalgia lane, and I hope you learn as much as I did. Were you a cartoon aficionado growing up?
You know something? I never was. I really didn't care that much about cartoons. I mean, I watched them when I was a child, but the way I got into this job was I was going to UCLA getting my master's degree in film, and I was making documentary films. And I was working at a talent agency. My uncle is a pretty famous talent agent. He's like the Broadway Danny Rose. He was Woody Allen's first agent, and he had a lot of the old comics and stuff. And we worked at that agency. And then when I graduated from UCLA, I needed to get a job. So my husband's father's partner's daughter, this is complicated. I should say it faster. My husband's father's partner's daughter, they were both doctors, my husband's father and his partner. His daughter was in the entertainment agency business, not talent agents, but finding people to work in the entertainment business, more like clerical jobs. So she sent me for an interview at this company called DIC. And I came up to the office and it said, DIC, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Paris. I said, I want to work at a company that's named after a penis that has offices in all these places, and maybe I get to go there. So I interviewed with the boss. There were just two people working in the company. Andy Hayward was the president, and I didn't tell him I had a master's degree because nobody wants to hear that in show business. It's kind
They don't care?
It's kind of a negative, really, because you spend too much time in school and you should be out working and getting experience. Yeah, they don't care for college. so I didn't tell him. I just told him I went to film school, and he hired me to be like a production assistant. We were in the recording studio. The first show we recorded was Inspector Gadget, and I was his assistant then, and I saw him, he was running the company and doing everything, also directing the voices. And I said, boy, I'd like to do this. I'd been working in a talent agency, and although I hadn't experienced directing actors, I'd been working with them. So he kind of lost interest in doing that because he had so many other things to do. So he let me do that. So I kind of learned on the job how to direct actors for animation, which is a really different thing than directing them in theater or television. So actually, I told him, I did go to film school and I could edit this, but then when I tried to edit it, it was such a mess. We had to hire a professional. I wasn't really good at that, but I really enjoyed working with actors and casting. So I started casting and then I started directing.
Okay. So with Inspector Gadget, for those of you who grew up in that era, or in my era for that matter, that show starred Don Adams as Inspector Gadget, who famously was Maxwell Smart from Get Smart. What was it like? Because were you directing him and his performances? Were you?
I was later. They did 26 episodes originally, and I came in after they'd finished recording those in Canada. And then when the show got picked up, I took over the directing of that. So
Because there were a ton of episodes. Like the first season, there were 65 episodes.
That's right, 65 episodes. So those were all finished by the time I came to Deke. So I came in after the show got picked up. But prior to that, I think I worked on Heathcliff, and there was another show called The Littles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that was fun. But those were all in post-production by the time I started. Just the first season of Gadget and the first season of The Littles. So I got to work on those.
So you were in the very bottom floor of when Deke started.
Exactly.
And you got to grow with Deke, which I assume eventually got more than 2 people working.
Yeah, there were several hundred by the time it closed.
Yeah, it was one of the biggest companies out there that was doing animation at the time.
Right, it's true. And it was one of the first companies that did both a series that would be in syndication as well as a network. They hadn't done that before.
Okay.
But, yeah.
How did were you part of the business side at all, or were you just mostly maintaining and executing on the productions? And
I was not part of the business side at all.
Okay.
I wasn't too interested in that, although I did do the negotiations for the talent.
Well, I mean, some of the other talent that you had on that show, you've got Frank Welker, who was Brain and Dr. Claw, and Frank worked forever and did voices for so many different things.
He just won a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
He is the voice of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Now he also voices Fred on the new iteration of Scooby-Doo. And you might know him as Megatron in the Transformers movies. Like he's everywhere. Then you've got
does great animals too. He was also Brain in Inspector Gadget, and he does all the chimps in all those movies about the Planet of the Apes. He does all what's the little with the yellow hat?
Curious George? Yeah.
He's the voice of Curious George. He's a brilliant guy, and he was also a wonderful comic too. He did stand-up. He did an opening act for Elvis Presley in Vegas.
There was stand-up opening for Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I've noticed, especially in the 80s and 90s, with these voiceover performers, there are a lot of the same actors coming up that are now like the megastars of that world today. Frank is one of them. You've got Cree Summer, who was Penny, and Holly Berger, who followed up as Penny on Inspector Gadget. But I'm curious about the size and scale of the talent pool. Were there a lot of voiceover actors out there?
Well, the thing about voiceover acting and acting for animation is that they have a specific SAG contract, when we were working with SAG actors or even Canadian, where with SAG you get 2 voices for the price of 1 and a third additional voice for 10% more. So we had to find actors that could do multiple voices and sound like different people. And that's when I teach, I tell people women have to be able to do babies, kids, teenagers, moms, old ladies, and you have to be able to do all different kinds of accents. And with the men, like a few people can do teenagers or kids, like only Billy West. There's hardly any people. There's so many people that I gave their first job to, like Billy West and Maurice LaMarche.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you have to find people that can do that variety of voices, not just one, unless they have a really unique voice. Mm-hmm. So there is a large pool of voice actors, and it gets bigger every day. But oftentimes people just fall back on the people they know because it's such a different style of acting. You have to be bigger. I say bigger, faster, louder when you're doing animation, because animation the process is so expensive that you can't leave dead air in there. It's like more like doing a radio show than doing acting for film or television. There can't be any subtlety, and it has to be nice and strong and energetic all the time.
And people like Maurice LaMarche and Billy West, they're very, very good at that.
Yes. It's like when I was directing Tom Cruise. He was the original Captain Planet. It took a while for him to get the energy required, for a character. Then he ended up not doing the show because he just didn't have time.
Sure. But with that show in particular, that show drew a lot of talent that wasn't necessarily specifically voiceover talent. I mean, you had Meg Ryan on that show. There was, Jeff Goldblum was there. You had
Elizabeth Taylor.
Taylor was there. Like it was incredible. Like going through and rewatching these shows, because a lot of these shows are on YouTube. You can catch a lot of these things.
Really?
But yeah,
you did your homework.
I did do my homework. But I mean, you've got your Gaia was Margot Kidder and Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg was the one I worked with.
Ed Asner playing Hoggish Greedley. You had Tim Curry, John Ratzenberger, Jim Cummings, super talented. If you don't know his face, you know his voice. You know all of his voices.
He's Winnie the Pooh.
He's Winnie the Pooh because he just took over as Winnie the Pooh, right, for this new movie.
He's in the theatrical release. Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum, like I said, Martin Sheen, Meg Ryan, Phil Hartman, Fred Savage, Dean Stockwell, Neil Patrick Harris. That show drew a bunch of people. What was it about that one that drew so many?
That was the first cartoon or children's program that was specifically focused on the environment and conservation.
I feel like a lot of senators now need to go back and watch that show.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, all the good that was done is being erased. But it was a really cause célèbre at that point. In fact, we had put an ad in the Variety. We were looking for Captain Planet. To play the lead role in the first animated children's program that dealt with environmental issues, and Tom Cruise called our office.
Really?
I wanted to be Captain Planet.
He saw the ad in Variety and wanted to be Captain Planet. And
the thing about doing shows like that, once you get one person, it kind of snowballs,
Sure.
So
once you had, because Tim Curry was in a lot of the episodes as Mal.
Tim Curry is a wonderful actor. I worked with him
incredible.
on several things. He was in Ghostbusters, and he was just a joy to work with. Lovely man.
Yeah.
I said to him once, I wish all the actors could be as good as you and as enthusiastic and as warm. And he said, now wouldn't that be dull? He was very humble and just lovely.
Well, and there were a lot of actors that you worked with. I want to talk a little bit about Maurice because I love him. I've followed his career for a really long time. I think he's super incredible. And I listened to a podcast that Maria recommended to me called Batman the Animated Podcast about the Batman series, and they were talking to Mr. LaMarche, and he brought you up.
Did he?
as being somebody who really, really started his career. He took over as Chief Quimbley on Inspector Gadget after Dan Hennessy. And that was his first recurring role on anything. And he talked about how he was doing stand-up, which this is the second person now that you found from stand-up. Was that a place that you would find people often?
Not really, because a lot of stand-up comedians were not very good actors. There were very few that were good actors. Phil Hartman was a wonderful actor. And Maurice was just a natural talent. He was brilliant and so versatile. Yeah.
So even at that time, even before he became all of these voices, did he have that range? Did you see that range with him on stage?
It was in his act. It was part of his act. He did voices of all the cartoons he watched as a kid.
Well, and he's the kind of guy, it sounds like he could sit next to you and just hear you and emulate that.
He did. He used to do Don Adams. Sometimes he didn't feel like doing certain aspects of the role. So he's like, Maurice did Don Adams when he had to be underwater and kind of gurgle. Don would say, he does me underwater. I can't do Don's voice at all, but Maurice did it perfectly. And Don got such a kick out of it. He wasn't threatened at all. He just really enjoyed it. Let Maurice do it.
It's amazing to see the talent of these people, especially when you grew up watching cartoons like I did, and then you see them nowadays getting kind of their time in the light because people care about these things, and there's so many opportunities for, with podcasts and with, Comic-Con and things like that, where you see these people doing these voices and you're like, all of those voices are coming out of you. But then you go back and you look at somebody who I also want to talk about, Mel Blanc. Mm-hmm. So you worked with Mel. You said that was one of the first people you directed.
It was Mel Blanc on Heathcliff. And he was such a lovely man and so talented and so good. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He'd been doing it for 50 years already.
And he was...
It was like, I thought, is this how directing is? It's so easy. But it wasn't.
No.
After him, no.
Oh, okay. With him, it was super easy.
Just a breeze, yeah.
Yeah. Well, with him and with people like with Maurice and some of these other names who are really, really talented with this, how much direction did they actually need? And how much working with them to get the performances out of them that you needed had to happen?
Well, it depended on the project itself, and on Ghostbusters we had Maurice LaMarche, Dave Coulier, Frank Welker, and Arsenio Hall. It was like 4 comedians. We laughed through the whole session. We had so much fun. One day, I was directing the actors. They were cutting up so much that I was more like a school teacher, a disciplinarian, than an actual director. All right, we're back to the show. One day we were recording, and in walks Ivan Reitman to see how we're doing. So that was a little exciting.
So with these sessions, are multiple people recording at the same time to go off of one another, or are they hitting their lines one by one? How is that working on? Again, I know it probably changes per show, but with this one in particular, were they all in there at the same time?
This one in particular, they were all in there at the same time, which was pretty hysterical. We hardly ever do that anymore. I mean, like, I just did Buddy Thunderstruck, and we were at the Stupid Buddy Studios, and they only have one mic, so you have to have one person at a time. So I have to be really familiar with the script and know how the actor is supposed to be responding to the person that they're talking to who isn't there.
Sure, and I think that this is a good opportunity then to go into, with a lot of your projects, you are casting director, but you're also voice director. What does that job entail? Is that actually sitting in the booth, listening to them and saying, no, do it this way or push it that way? Or
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You have to tell, if they're not, like if you have the script or the storyboard in front of you and you see, we used to work with the storyboards, we don't anymore, but you see that they're in a distance from each other, then you have to tell them you got to project in this scene. There's a windstorm behind you, so you got to pretend you're yelling. And I have to oversee the technical qualities, too, of the recording session. We can't pop our P's or have hisses or any kind of sibilance. So we're watching all of those things at once. The acting is the most important, but if there's any technical problems, we have to do it over again because they can't use it.
With each one of these shows, are you working with a lot of the same people to do multiple roles, or are you, when a new episode comes up and you've got a new like guest star type thing, and I'm not even really sure how it works compared to live action television, when you've got a new character that comes in, how's the casting process work for these new characters?
It depends on the show itself. If it's just a small part, you can, because you have people that can do multiple voices, you just have them, pick this line up. There's just three sentences from this character. But if it's completely different, or if there's, a cast of all guys, with Ghostbusters, we had all guys and one girl. And so we'd have to bring in, other women, or we've had all kinds of interesting people on that. We had Sir George Martin's son, Gregory Martin, do a voice on that, and his voice sounds just like his father's. It's deep and husky. We had all kinds of, because they had to play ghosts, so, and we didn't want our original characters to strain their voices, and get nodes on their vocal cords.
Well, because a lot of the shows you cast from the very beginning. Do they exist like when you're casting voice, when you're casting cartoons? Is it similar to other television shows and stuff where you're putting out offers to people, or are you often like reaching out to a lot of the people that you know directly that like Maurice can knock this out, so we're going to go ahead and offer this to him? Or is it a little bit more open from the beginning?
That's a good question. Normally, when you're starting a new series, you have to audition, do a whole casting process and audition and have several options for each character. And then the producer decides. When I was at Deke, I could make all those decisions. But now that I'm doing freelance, there's a lot of cooks that give their input. So we do the whole casting process, and we give several options for each character. And normally everybody that we submit can do multiple voices. So that's how it works.
Now, with these casting sessions, because I've actually never been into a voiceover casting session, is it on tape the same way that television or movie audition is, or is it just voice and how are you presenting that to the powers that be in modern?
Well, most people nowadays have their own voice actors have their own facility to record. So we send them the auditions. I give them any information I have. Sometimes we have a picture of the character, and I ask them to send me an MP3. I have a little recording studio myself that I can have some people come to if they don't have the ability to record at home. And we narrow it down. Sometimes we bring them in, to see how directable they are.
Okay.
After they're in the finalists.
Yeah.
And then the producer usually decides. And project I'm working on right now, Care Bears.
You're working on is this a reboot of Care Bears? That's exciting.
I worked on it in 1985.
I was going to say, that's one of your very early...
So the first things I ever did, and I'm doing it again in 2018. So it's, the thing about animation is that every 10 years you have a whole new audience.
Yes.
So you can, they can watch the old things, they can watch the new things.
Which, it's a conversation that a lot of people are having in Hollywood right now in general with movies and with all these reboots and TV shows coming back as movies, and a lot of people complain about that. But I had a conversation with a friend of mine here a little while back who kind of broke it down the same way that you just said. Every generation, every 10 years or so, every 15 years with movies, you have a whole new generation that's coming in that's not going to connect with Ghostbusters like I connected with Ghostbusters, because it was of the times for me.
Right.
The same with these cartoons, but updating it and bringing it into the modern era, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It's made for a new generation that's going to be consuming that content, because Care Bears from the 80s isn't going to, the pace is different, the stories that they're telling is different. Even Captain Planet, which I watched quite a few episodes again for this because I loved that show growing up. Some of that stuff that they're talking about, a lot of it is still like, we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues that they were hitting in that show. But to see an updated version of things like this, what sort of things are you taking into account differently now than you took into account in the 80s?
Well, first of all, one of the major impetus for making animation all throughout the period was merchandise.
Sure. You got your G.I. Joes and your...
Right. So that was a big consideration for a lot of the projects I worked on. And then the FCC got involved, kind of in children's, Peggy Charon was talking about children's programming and how, you couldn't put commercials for the same subject right in between the cartoon itself. So there was a lot of discussion about that and a lot of thought about that. And Captain Planet was one of the shows that, was just, there was some merchandise, but that wasn't the impetus for the show. And another show that I love that I was really proud of, that there wasn't too much merchandise, a little bit, but that's the one I won my Emmy for is Madeline, which is something that I'm so proud of because it was off one of the few shows that was female oriented, little girl oriented, although boys could watch it too. But she was a strong little girl when it was all, superheroes and boy things and G.I. Joes and everything. Then there was Madeline, and all the little girls were so supportive of each other, and they loved each other, and they helped each other in, difficult situations. So that was wonderful. But even with the like Strawberry Shortcake and Rainbow Bright and all those shows that originally were put out by merchandise companies, they had to have a theme, and they had to be socially relevant, and they had to show caring and support, and you couldn't undermine other characters. Even the bad guys, you couldn't say really terrible things about them.
How gratifying was it at that point to be able to win for something like that?
It meant a lot. First of all, we never thought it would happen. I mean, we had done other shows like Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego that was educational, and that was for PBS. And we did Liberty's Kids, which was about the American Revolution. That was for PBS. So but that was after Madeline. It was a thrill. It was so exciting. And because the woman that wrote it, Judy Rothman-Rofe, was a good friend, and we were in it together. It was really gratifying.
Well, with these kind of shows, how did you become part of, specifically with this one, how did you become part of Madeline? And it was this, you weren't still with Deke at the time, right?
Yes,
you
I
were.
was. Uh-huh.
Okay.
So it was a Deke project.
Okay.
And we had to, since the little girls were French, it was really hard to find American little girls that could speak, do the French accent, speak French. So we ended up recording that in Canada, which was perfect, in Montreal, where everybody speaks French. And the first person that did the music, it was wonderful, some wonderful music on it. Joe Raposo, who did all the music for Sesame Street. He wrote It Ain't Easy Being Green. And right in the middle of it, after the first season, he passed away of a heart attack. Suddenly, it was terrible because he was young. And we ended up having another composer named Andy Street, who was also just fabulous. I mean, he made such wonderful songs. And Judy Rothman wrote the lyrics as well as the scripts for the shows, or oversaw the script writing. And it was just a real team effort, and the little girls were so adorable and sweet.
When you're working with kids as opposed to adults, what are the things that what things are more difficult and what things are easier?
I think it's just generally working with kids is more difficult. Some of them are really talented and really good. Of course, you're limited in the time. California state law requires that you have a teacher there, and they have a certain amount of schooling to be had for each one, so you have to kind of do it in shifts, and it takes a lot longer to work with real kids. But the little Madeline girls, they got it. They were all professional actors.
How old, what age group were they in at that time?
They were like 8 to 12. As we did so many episodes of Madeline, the girls grew out of their voices too. Although most of the time, it's boys that grow out. Their voices change, and you have to recast. But
and when you recast, are you trying to find somebody who matches that voice as close as possible?
Yes.
How? Because I know I've seen that happen with television shows and stuff where they have to recast a character and they try to get them close enough. How difficult is it to find somebody who has that same voice quality?
It's difficult, but not impossible. You just keep trying.
And what sort of resources do you guys have as voiceover casting to draw people in? Like, are you putting out on the same breakdowns that other things are going out on, or are there other different resources?
Normally, I've never actually used the breakdowns, but normally we go to the voice agents and they submit people, or I teach acting for animation, so I have a huge bank of wonderful actors that want to get into animation, but they've never had the chance, because the pool is pretty tight, people tend to use the same people that they know. So, we have them submit auditions and see what happens.
So with your teaching, let's get into that for a little while. How long have you been teaching acting for animation?
I'd say at least 10 years.
Is this a class that you teach somewhere here in Los Angeles?
It is. It's a class that I teach at a place called the Voicecaster. It's a voice casting company, and they teach acting for promotion. They have different classes
Okay.
for promos and commercials, and I teach the animation.
How do people find out about this? How can they get more information and jump on board? Because I want to do this.
Well, actually, there's this great pamphlet, and it's also online. It's called the Voiceover Resource Guide. And I would highly recommend that to anybody that is interested in doing voiceovers, because it lists all the voiceover agents, it lists all the classes you can take, it lists all the rates, the commercial rates and everything, just about everything you would need to know, all the recording studios. It's a great, I'll show you the pamphlet later.
Great. So another thing is voiceover reels that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, because they're different than a video reel, because a lot of your video reel is one showing that you can act, but it's portraying who you are. With voiceover, you're portraying a lot of different people, a lot of different characters. Are there any do's and don'ts of voiceover reels that you run into often that you're like, I wish people would stop doing that, or that you wish people would do more of?
Well, I focus on animation reels. Normally on voiceover reels, people have like 4 sections. You know, they have the promos and the commercials and the animation and the like narration. So they'll have 4. You know, there's not reels anymore. That is all, you know, on their website or wherever. So so for animation, first of all, it should be no longer than 1.5 minutes. I play samples in my voiceover class, you know, and you can go on any of the voiceover agents' websites, and they'll have samples of all their clients, and you can listen to those and see what they do. But you have to get as many voices, different sounding voices as possible on the animation reel, showing different ages. If you can do animals, that's always good. If you can sing, you put a little of that, and singing character, put that on, and but keep it to 1.5 minutes. I tell people, maybe write a little skit for yourself, you know, something entertaining, because it's torture listening to those things, and it's torture doing them. It's a hard job. So something that you can amuse yourself with. And plus agents, you know, if you want to submit it to agent, get a voiceover agent, they have the attention span of a gnat. So it should be 1.5 minutes maximum, with multiple voices and ages and accents.
Okay. So another one of the shows that I kind of wanted to get into a little bit was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures. Was this one a Deke
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
So what's really interesting to me about this one is the first season, you have Keanu and Alex Winters and George Carlin as the leads. They're still the voices of the characters, correct?
We did not have Keanu.
You didn't?
No. Does it say?
According to IMDb, you did. It was one of the ones that I couldn't find any episodes of.
Really?
So I was just going off of the IMDb. So he wasn't able to do it. But
I don't remember George Carlin either. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
The blonde kid was the
Alex
only
Winters.
one.
Yeah. Okay. With a show like that, and with a show, there was the Real Ghostbusters as well. These are 2 cartoons that were based around big movies that were a big part of the zeitgeist at the time. What sort of freedom do you have to make it its own thing, and what sort of like constraints do you have to make sure that it's close enough to the original property, the original IP, that allows it to still work?
Well, that's usually mostly up to the producer. You know, on Ghostbusters, originally the character of Peter was played by Lorenzo Music, who had his own style. He had a kind of a laid-back, monotone style, but he was a wonderful actor. And when Bill Murray heard the voices, he said, how come Maurice is doing Egon, Harold Ramis, and it sounds just like him, and Peter doesn't sound like me at all? And so then we replaced him with Dave Coulier, who was doing the exact voice of Bill Murray. So there's so many, as I say, there's so many chefs involved, you know, that get their fingers in the pie. So it's really determined by outside sources.
Yeah. So
did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. So I'm curious about voiceover actors in general. do a lot of voiceover actors start off or appear often as traditional on-screen talent, or is it a fairly specialized group from the get-go?
That's a good question, too. Again, it varies. When I teach my class, I say the most important thing about acting for animation is acting. You have to be a good actor. Everybody thinks, oh, I do funny voices. I can, my cousin says I should do cartoons. Well, I say you're up against people from the Royal Shakespeare Company. Tim Curry does voices, wonderful actors. And then on the other hand, there's some, screen actors that sound horrible when they're doing cartoon voices. They don't get it. They can't do the mic technique. They can't get big like it needs to be for acting for animation. So I won't mention any names, but so it's acting is the most important thing. And then if you can act, you have to be able to act big, and ham it up. Everything you learned about acting for the screen or for television, you have to throw it away. I say sledgehammer is what we need for cartoon anime acting.
So with that being said, are there tips and tricks as a voice director that you have to help people get out of that smallness, out of that subtlety, other than saying get bigger and
bigger, louder, faster? I said, do what you're doing, only a lot faster and a lot bigger. And I tell them emphasize words. There's a whole process to it. You've got to find words that you emphasize. The characters in animation, they don't have expression on their face. So it's all in the acting. The emotion is all there. So you have to go through the script and the copy and find something that you can go after for every single sentence. Every sentence should be different. You can't sound like you're reading. You have to sound like you're acting for every, and when you get copy for audition copy, what they do is they take excerpts from the script, most likely, the pilot script, with different scenes where there's different emotions showing so that we can get the range of emotion for the talent to make sure they have the capability of really revealing it through their voice.
Is there very often that you cast somebody that you find out down the line, a couple episodes in or an episode in, that this isn't working? And
yes.
That happens often.
Often, yes.
Yeah. I guess this line of questioning is kind of the process of casting meshing with the process of the animation, meshing with the whole timeline of things.
Right, and with the other talent as well,
Yeah.
Oftentimes some voices sound too similar once you get them into the studio. And so you have to either nuance it or do something in post-production or recast.
Sure. Where in the development of these shows is the casting as opposed to the actual recording, as opposed to the actual animation part of it, as opposed to the release of the show? Like
Hey,
what?
You didn't know that. That's right.
Yeah, I had no
take
clue.
it for so much for granted that the first thing is the script is developed, or the series is developed, or Bible is written for the show, with description of each of the characters. And then they write, either the writer, the head writer in the show will write scripts for each audition, for each character to audition, or else they'll have a pilot script that we can take excerpts from. Then we do the audition, and hopefully they've drawn the characters beforehand. In the Bible, there should be the character description as well as a picture of the character. So then we take that to the actors, to many actors. You usually see about 30 to 50 people per character, and they submit an audition, or we audition them, and then we narrow it down. Then we record. The writers are writing the scripts. We record the script. It used to be we'd get a copy of the storyboard, but we don't get that anymore. They do the storyboard after we record the script. So oftentimes there's pickups because they'll make changes in the storyboard, and then the animation is done last. And then if we need to do any corrections, we do looping or ADR to pick up some lines at the end that aren't working. But
so they're basing a lot of the animation off of the performances.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's really important for the animators to hear the voices, to know, what the expression is going to be on the face or whatever.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to all this stuff, that, like I was saying at the beginning, my ignorance is my sword. right now because I don't know about this whole process of casting. The more we can find out, the more we can know because, it's with you, you've been doing it for so long, you understand it like probably no other person out there right now. There's very few who understand it like you.
There are several, but I take it for granted. I just assume that everybody knows, which isn't the case. So this is good that people are learning how the process works.
Yeah.
But definitely the voice comes first. The only time that doesn't happen is when like they're dubbing like an anime cartoon or something. Then,
sure, because the voice already came first. They animated it off that, and now they're redubbing it.
Right.
So casting directors are starting to receive more recognition for this with award shows and the Artios Awards and things like that are happening. But in the interest in intersectionality, do you feel better or less represented in the community of voice casting when it comes to casting in general, getting the recognition that it deserves?
I've never not felt that I didn't get enough recognition because the voice, the animation community is so much smaller, and we belong to the Television Academy, and we get together and we vote, for the Emmys and things like that. So we're a pretty tight-knit group, and because I'm also directing, I get acknowledgement for that as well. Probably if I was just casting, I might not feel that way.
Sure. Because I know you helped discover Maurice and a couple other people. Are there other people that you feel like you helped kind of usher into the world that we still hear their voices nowadays?
When I go to parties, people say to me, "You gave me my start in the business." If it wasn't for you, I can't remember who they are. but it was Maurice, Arsenio. That was Arsenio's first cartoon. Townsend Coleman.
Okay.
Says that to me. And Billy West. That was his first cartoon. He was on...
That was Billy West's first cartoon?
Yeah, he was on what's his name? Howard Stern show doing that. But he hadn't done cartoons before. Yeah,
because he's
huge. Yeah.
He's huge, and he's he's got his podcast and other things. Like everybody, if you know anybody in voiceover, you probably know Maurice LaMarche, and you probably know Billy West. And if you don't, you do because you've heard their voices in everything.
David Coburn ended up being the voice of, I don't know if you know, he ended up being the voice of Captain Planet. He's a wonderful actor. For a while, there's a lot of Canadian actors. I've worked with so many people. A guy named Long John Baldry in Canada was British. He was a famous blues musician. Jim Burns. A lot of actors that in Canada, and who else in America? One good one though that I love telling people is that for a while our boss went to Omaha, and he came back. He was in a project with Warren Buffett, and I directed Warren Buffett in his first cartoon. He was fun, and. But there was a young man in Omaha there was a children's theater there. And my boss came back. He goes, "Those people are really good. I want you to start working in Omaha. It'll be a lot cheaper than working in LA." And there's a lot of talent there, which was true. There were several community theaters. But one of the young men that ended up being cast in Street Sharks, which is my son's favorite show.
I love Street Sharks growing up.
And Archie, he was the role of Archie. His name is Andrew Reynolds. And he decided to move. He was one of the stars. He was only 16. He was one of the stars of the children's theater there. And he moved to New York. And for a while, he was having a really hard time getting a job. And I cast him in a few things I was doing. He was Hamilton in our Liberty's Kids. And he used to write me and say, "Oh, if it wasn't for you, I'd be starving to death." And then he got cast as one of the two leads in Book of Mormon. And then he got cast from Book of Mormon. He got cast in that television series for HBO, Girls.
Yes.
And now he's on Broadway all the time. And I gave him his first screen credit.
Him his start.
I'm really proud of that.
Well, one of the things that you've cast a lot of are heroes. You with Captain Planet, and with one of my other favorites is COPS, Cops. I don't know why that one stood out to me, but I remember that show so vividly from growing up. what is it about a voice is heroic? Is there a quality to different voices that you can pick out? And this may be a very too vague, too general of a question, but it's interesting to me to try to figure out what qualities within voices you're looking for a heroic person, or the side buddy character, or the love interest, or any of these different things. Are there certain qualities that you're looking for?
Well, oftentimes the hero has to be deep voiced, but it's more in the acting than the voice quality, really. They have to be able to project the feeling of being heroic, When I was directing Tom Cruise as Captain Planet, I kept saying, Tom, just give it another 6 inches. And he said, Marsha, you're embarrassing me. But then he'd be able to get it. I mean, that's why you have to do a shorthand when you're directing people. So that was my shorthand for him. But it's the acting quality and the internal strength that they project into the mic that makes it heroic.
Well, and when you see a lot of these people, when you see Maurice, sometimes the voice that's coming out of him doesn't seem like him. And with a lot of these other people, their quality of voice, but their presentation is completely different than their visual presentation. So one of the things that you did was Dennis the Menace. So you did the cartoon, but you also did a television movie where you cast. How difficult was it to square those two things after having cast the voices for Dennis the Menace, and then also having to then cast a human person who sounded like that and acted like that, but also looked like that?
You just have to go through the process, and see so many people, and you have a lot of input from producers and the network and everybody that's paying for it. So sometimes my choice isn't always the one that they pick, but we have to give them a lot of options to see as many people as possible.
So with that, in the sense of working up the chain, mm-hmm. when you're casting things, I assume it's kind of that way too when you're casting voice. There's other people that have to sign off. How much of that are you fighting for a certain person, or is it, here are your options, take your pick, any of these people would do it?
If I have a person that I think is really perfect for the role, I will push for them. But if it's equal, then I let the suits make the choice. And one thing you were talking about earlier, I don't know if we can go back into
Please.
It, just the saying that the people don't have to look like the characters that they play. That's another thing I talk about in my class. I said that everybody wants to do animation. First of all, because a lot of celebrities want to do it. A lot of times, though, it just pays scale. It doesn't pay that much money. It used to pay a lot when you did worked for Disney, like did a Disney movie, and you get residuals from the DVD sales, but there aren't DVD sales any longer, so that doesn't work. But I tell people, people don't do it for the money, and agents don't like to hire people to do animation because they don't make that much money. It's 9 times out of 10, it's scale, plus 10, and there aren't that many residuals nowadays either. So I say, if people really love animation, they want to do it. And I say, it's great. There's the competition, first of all, and the people that have been doing it for years. And I said, but the great thing is you don't have to memorize a script. You have it right in front of you. You don't have to wear any makeup. You don't have to fix your hair. You can wear pajamas. Nobody cares.
So it sounds pretty good.
It's pretty fun, and if you make a mistake, you can do it over again. Nobody yells at you unless you make too many mistakes. But there's some great stories about mic technique and people. There's this famous actress that was really funny lady, and she was a musical comedy star and a Broadway star, and they were in the studio, and she was in her 50s. They were in her studio, and they kept saying, "Your blouse is making noise." She says, "Oh, okay." And she took off her blouse and recorded in her bra with the whole cast in the room.
Get the job done.
Exactly.
So as we're winding down here, I want to talk about, there's a couple shows that you're currently working on top of doing another Care Bears, which is awesome, and Buddy Thunderstruck. You cast and work with Harry Chaskin, who was the one who introduced us to you. So thank you very much, Harry. Really, really appreciate it. This has been a blast to talk with you.
Thank you. I love Harry. He's so talented.
He is wonderful. And
there's the heroic voice for you.
Yeah. And when you meet Harry, he's this very quiet, very humble. But what I'm curious about is what are the differences that you're seeing in modern television animation casting than what you used to see back in the day? Is there like the technology, how it's changed, and how is the process faster? Is it sped up because the technology has allowed it to speed up?
The technology has changed a lot, but it hasn't sped up the process at all, because it's still a little belabored. You have the whole cast in the studio, and then you have to make sure you have no technical problems, and you have to make sure everybody's getting their lines and that the sound is balanced, or you have one person at a time. And the assembly is a lot faster. Editing is a lot faster. I mean, we used to use razor blades and tape, but you don't have to do that any longer. But the process itself is still takes a long time, because especially when you had the studio, when we were doing Buddy Thunderstruck, we had
Ted
Raimi, and he hadn't done that much animation. He'd been on a lot of on-camera stuff before, and he was a wonderful actor. I mean, he is a wonderful actor, but he was an actor. It was the thing we said to him all the time: faster, just like that, only faster, because animation just is expensive, and you have to do it fast. And if you do it as long as it would take to do a show, you'd have an hour's worth of animation, just one person. So you have to be on people all the time, faster, and do it. Emphasize this word. You're responding to this. So it's, especially when they're by themselves, they don't have a clue how the other person has read the line.
There's no response, and you can't ping back and forth off of one another.
So I have to know either how I'm going to have the person, if they haven't come in yet, have them say the line, or how they've said it in response, and this person has to respond to the way they've said it. So
with that, is that just the experience that you've had over the years of being able to know that, or how are you tracking that, how you want to capture that?
I make notes in the script when I go through it.
Okay. Well, I want to open up the floor to you and ask if there are any other stories or info out there that people can find about you and your career.
No, I think we've covered a lot. I'll probably wake up in the middle of the night and think of something that I haven't told you. But
well, I've still got more questions, but I'm getting the we need to sign off.
Yeah.
The red light is coming on. Some of the things that I did want to get to, because they were shows that I loved growing up, were Sonic the Hedgehog and the Super Mario Brothers Super Show and Super Dave.
Those are like whole half-hour shows, and the descriptions in themselves. Sonic the Hedgehog was, Jaleel White, who was the voice of Urkel. Oh, he was a character. He was so much fun. And then we did Sonic. He had to do 3 different voices when he played his sister and his brother and himself. Yeah, we did a lot of episodes of Sonic. Yeah. Super Dave.
And they're doing a live-action Sonic the Hedgehog.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Guess he won't be playing that. I don't know who's going to do that voice. Bob Einstein was hysterical. Mm-hmm. He was so funny.
So good. And that show didn't run very long, but I remember it. It's those Saturday morning cartoons. There's something that's missing in today's society. Because
but they were so violent.
They were. They absolutely were. This has been an absolute pleasure. Marsha Goodman, thank you so much for sitting down with us and having us in your home.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
That was fun.
I don't know about Maria, but I could have stayed there, eaten cookies, and talked to her all day. If you want to find out more about anything we talked about in this episode, check out our website, placingfaces.com, for all the links in the episode's show notes. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, love, heart, thumbs up, and share the show. Unfortunately, we don't have the means to market properly and are relying on word of mouth for growth, so every friend you tell means the world to us. Tune in next week when we chat with Denise Chamian. And if you don't know who Denise is, you need to remedy that immediately. Denise has cast some of the biggest movies with some of the biggest and brightest stars and the best directors out there. From Saving Private Ryan, Big Fish, Red Sparrow, to The Man in the High Castle and the recent release of Bumblebee, my favorite of all the Transformers so far.
I think that for the most part, because there are many different reasons why people become movie stars, but I think they are truly talented. I think they're good actors. They know what parts they should play. They know what parts they shouldn't play.
So there's an awareness of self there.
I think there is. I've seen a lot of A-list actors pass on roles that they didn't feel they were right for. And most of the time, I have agreed with their decision. And I've understood why they've passed.
Placing Faces is powered by Collaborator.com, a media production service connecting media professionals to companies, brands, and agencies, allowing you to scale your production based on your needs. Video professionals find work, and companies save money. Have you ever wanted to be a casting director, or do you have a project that you need casting direction for? Check out our partners, the Casting Society of America, for more information. They have introduced us to so many of our guests while serving as a hub of information about this branch of the entertainment industry. To learn more about the Society and what it takes to get into casting, you can visit www.castingsociety.com. And lastly, if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. What casting directors do you want to hear from next? Thank you so much for tuning in, and be well.